Grab your Wayback Machines, Wargamers, because today we're taking a little trip. Not just a trip to the sunny beach, but a trip through time back to those halcyon days of 1973. We're going to talk about Donald Featherstone's Solo Wargaming, edited by John Curry. This was written way back in 1973. And I know what you're probably thinking. What are you reading a wargaming book from 1973 for? Don't you know they're still making wargame stuff today? I do know that. But I also know that, well, here I have to take a step back in my own personal Wayback Machine and explain where I'm coming from. I have had one foot in the tabletop role-playing game community for a long time, and when things started to go south in that community, as far as the corporatization of the hobby, a number of people took it upon themselves to say, hey, I don't like where things are going. I'm going to backtrack along this, what do they call it? Backtrack along the arrow of history, see where things went wrong, and see if I can identify some fundamental issues that if we fix those, I can have a much more enjoyable time at the table. That gave rise to a movement called the OSR, or the Old School Renaissance, or Revolution, or Revival, or whatever R word you wanted to use, just to kind of plant the flag and say, I don't like the way things have gone. I don't like the modern version of tabletop role-playing games. I want to play something that is much more evocative of role-playing games from the 1970s and 80s. And it spawned a whole slew of products and a whole new corporate vision that was in many ways better and maybe in some ways even worse. But the point is that these people took tabletop role-playing and made it their own. I want to encourage you to do the same thing with miniature wargaming. And it's not just something that I expect you to do without doing the legwork myself. So to that end, to demonstrate a good faith commitment to investigating the roots of our hobby, I purchased a copy of Donald Featherstone's Solo Wargaming. There's no better name to go to than Donald Featherstone. He's a guy who wrote a number of seminal texts back around the year 1970 that outlined the hobby and really analyzed it from a much more fundamental and core perspective. And he charted a lot of the paths that the hobby has taken, a lot of the mechanics that we use, and a lot of the ways we approach tabletop wargaming come from his scholarship. Now, I'll put a link to this book, which you can get on the Amazon.com for about $10. That's what I paid. And here's some analog solutions to digital problems. How am I going to talk about an ebook that I downloaded that's stored on this phone right here when I'm filming it with this phone right here? Well, that's why I printed this up. The book is not really this thin. It's a proper, 250, 300-page book. That you can read in a few days and really dig into what we mean by solo wargaming. For those of you that have watched the channel since its inception, or even just gone back and watched some of the older videos, you'll realize that my concept of solo wargaming is essentially double-sided wargaming, a two-player wargame, but I'm just going to play both sides. And that's a legitimate way to do that. If you enjoy a two-player game, but you don't have an opponent, what else can you do? Donald Featherstone recognizes that. In addition to providing a host of suggestions for ways to play solo war games that are very different from anything I'd considered, and he does provide suggestions, a lot of which you may recognize. We'll get into those in just a minute. But he also manages to outline something very fundamental to solo wargaming, and that's that it doesn't have to be limited to normal wargaming, except one person plays both sides. He actually outlines, clear back in 1973, mind you, that with a rudimentary AI, an artificial intelligence, or a game system that operates as the opposition, you can create war games that are as much a puzzle, a strategic or even a tactical puzzle, as anything else. That's an important concept that we're all kind of aware of, but to have somebody lay it out for you step by step and just enunciate it, just finally put words to that concept, there's value in that. But good old Donald doesn't stop there. He also goes the next step by providing some inspiration for why you, dear viewer, might want to engage in solo wargaming, not because you lack an opponent, but for its own sake. He points out that when it comes time to solo wargame, time is no longer of the essence. You get to control what time does the game start, what time does the game end. Do I want to stop after 3 turns, go out and get some dinner, and then come back, and then play 3 more turns, go watch a movie, then come back? Logistically, there are reasons to enjoy solo wargaming. That is, in addition to the things we talked about already, where if you set up the proper rule set, then it becomes more of a puzzle to be unlocked or a mystery to be unraveled. We see this in solo war games today, such as Perilous Tales. For those of you that are big fans of Guerrilla Miniature Games, he's got a series that he's running on Perilous Tales, which is a solo war game. Or a game like Warhammer Quest, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. That is a solo game where all of the enemies are programmed by an AI. That's also an interesting game because it uses some of the concepts outlined by Mr. Featherstone, such as the randomized exploration. In Warhammer Quest, you don't even know what the battlefield looks like until you turn over a certain number of cards. I'll give you another great example of a way that Donald Featherstone encourages you as a solo wargamer to surprise yourself. And that is by using there's 2 ways. One is a randomized setup. If you're going to do a big battle game, you nominate a unit and you roll a d6. And you basically number, so if this is our table, you'll say, all right, this is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And for each unit, you roll the d6. And, you'll have a good spread, but it's entirely possible that if you've got 10 units, you may wind up having 4 of them over here on your right flank, and then just 1 in each of these others. Well, that adds up to 9. Okay, so maybe 4, 2, 1, 1, 1. That could happen. So, as the general, the way to think about that is, well, I suppose I've got my Emperor back in the rear echelons. He's a Remph, and he has ordered me to go hard right. Well, now I'm the general, or even I was the deputy general, and the actual general took a bad case of consumption, so he'd already deployed. Now, how am I going to use that right flank given what the enemy is showing? And you may do the same thing for the enemy. So just that added little bit of randomness allows you to exercise a little bit less control over the setup, which in turn gives you a much greater potential for having to overcome limitations that you might not consider, that you might not have considered had you designed the scenario yourself and if you had designed it completely for yourself. One of the other suggestions he makes, and I'm going to be using a few of these, and I'll try to credit him as we move forward in our videos over the rest of the year. One of the other suggestions he has, and I really like this, is to use small tokens. I purchased a number of the kind of chips you would use for, say, Michigan Rummy. They're small poker chips, about yay big, and nominate each one for one of your characters. And to use the Void Pirates, my personal current favorite as an example, you've got characters 1 through 5. And then you write 1 through 5 on each of the chips, you set them down, you mix them all up, and you say, okay, I guess I'll start 2 of my dudes here, and 2 here, and 1 here. And you don't know which figures are which. So you'll have to decide, well, I'll probably only move everybody 4 centimeters until they're finally revealed. You do the same thing with the opposition. Well, I'm just going to go ahead and put all 5 right over here, with just 1 outlier on this side. Well, now I'm not going to reveal these until they're in line of sight of one of the opposition chips. And once that happens, if they can see each other, that's when we'll flip them over. So you've got a mystery, and maybe you even include 2 or 3 blind chips. So I've got 4 guys on my team. I'll use 7 chips. It's entirely possible that the first 2 chips to see each other are, call them cloaked or, dummy chips. In that case, you're operating at a complete mystery through the first half of the battle, and it's not until that fog of war is lifted that you have the usual wargamer perspective that's from the top down, and I know everything. Not knowing everything creates challenges. Challenges are interesting. Overcoming challenges is kind of the point of a hobby like miniature wargaming. So there's a few ideas that you can incorporate into your own war games, even a 2-player war game. Think about how much more interesting it would be to randomly set up 10 chips for your 5 guys and your opponent to do the same, and neither one of you knows exactly what's going to happen until those chips start to become revealed. That's an interesting fog of war concept, and that is a way of removing yourself one step further from the total omniscience of typical wargaming. There's a lot of others. Donald Featherstone also goes into and highly recommends keeping a war journal. One of the great things about solo wargaming is that you can run an entire campaign by yourself. And he suggests that you get out some paper and you draw out a map that is to scale. A nice large map where 1 inch equals 1 foot of gaming space. So an 11 by 17 map where you designate which units are where, once those units encounter each other for the 2 forces, then you basically drop a box down on your map, and that is where your table's going to be. So you'll already establish where the rivers and hills are, and as the generals are pushing their pieces around on the large map, it's not until they encounter each other that you've got a battle that forms, and it's an organically created scenario that owes more to the campaign itself. That also means that you can individually track unit rosters, and the results of individual battles will determine how you move the survivors of a battle. The winners will push through, the survivors may or may not survive. You may be able to retreat from the table, and here's an interesting thing, not fighting to the death. Anybody that has fled off table has the opportunity to move to join forces with one of the other army groups that you've got moving around. And because you are doing this on your own, you can do it however you really want to. You can track it with as much detail as you need. You can, and you've got time to chart all of that information and just enjoy the process of being the general of both sides from a strategic standpoint, as well as from the individual tactical standpoint. It's an interesting concept, and I don't think I've seen that put into use in any tabletop war game in decades. So there's another great, there's another great suggestion for you that's right on top, right here in black and white for you. Donald Featherstone, he uses, these are guys out in the Northwest frontier, in the graveyard of empires, the Brits versus the Afghans. In the colonial era, he offers advice for solo wargaming in a host of eras, whether it's Napoleonics or American Civil War, English Civil War, across the board. He's got suggestions for you. He even has suggestions for what to do when you are too sick to get out of bed and you have your wife bring you a couple of handfuls of figures of what kind of miniature war games you can play while you are convalescing from some, maybe even a disease that's a much bigger deal than they're making it out to be. Or perhaps a disease that's not as big a deal as the media is making it out to be. Who knows? You're the one that's sick. He's got suggestions for small-scale games. I think jousting is one of them, for example, which is kind of a gimme. But he's got some other ideas for solo war games you can play even when you're too sick to get out of bed. So, great book, a lot of food for thought. You can see the kind of rudiments of modern wargaming already taking shape as Donald Featherstone is offering guidance, not just to the gentleman of the 1970s, but also to you and to me and to wargamers everywhere. So highly recommend, particularly if you are locked down, locked up, or someplace that you can't get your hands on a regular opponent, or if you're just one of those bold as brass sons of guns that has up to the challenge of solo wargaming, get yourself a copy of this. Amazon.com, $10 for the digital copy. It's like $25 for a hard copy. I'm too cheap. I want to spend that $15 on more figures. So that's what I did. Thanks for watching, everybody. Appreciate you coming along for the ride. And until next time, Viva Cristo Rey.